All right, let's go into an overview of this morning's event. I'm pleased that you're able to join us. This is again the second session for our 2021 series that we titled Being Mortal, thinking about the end of life decision making. Today's discussion will focus on healthcare proxies and living wills. Before I introduce our two guests, I often talk about my own experience with my two parents who I adored, who passed at around the same time and got very sick at the same time. And so, whenever we're doing any of these presentations, I stop and reflect back about, gee, what happened to us at that moment? And I will tell you, because I went through both experiences, having an end of life proxy to go to the ER with a family member with, and not having it, and what a radical difference in the process and the confusion level and the emotional level for my whole family and my parents when we didn't have it versus when we did. So no one thinks they want to sit around and discuss answering questions in advance. How do they want their potential death to go? But trust me, it is in your best interest if you have your opinions known and that those around you, whether they're your closest loved ones or they're just a doctor trying to come up with some answer at the last second when he or she doesn't know you, your opinion, what you hope will happen, is much more likely to be the storyline if you've actually had these materials. So healthcare proxies, living wills, speaking from experience, you don't want to do them, but you need to do them. So with that, we're very fortunate to have two advanced care planning experts joining us this morning. Sally Kaplan is the program director of What Matters, Caring Conversations about the End of Life at the Marlene Meyerson Jewish Community Center. And Tina Jansen Spinoza is the senior staff attorney and program coordinator at the Total Life Choices program at the New York Legal Assistance Group. Sally and Tina will give an overview of what advanced care planning is and emphasize the importance of communicating your wishes and values as you choose a healthcare proxy and develop and complete an advanced directive. After their presentations, Brad Usher, my chief of staff, will moderate the Q&A portion of the town hall. I know you're used to having me do that part, but I double booked myself this morning, so Brad will be handling the Q&A. Now it is my pleasure to turn over the proceedings to both Tina and Sally, and they will take it from here. So good morning, ladies, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Senator Krueger, and I thank you for that compelling personal story and this general sense of what we're going to be talking about today, because everything else to follow will be commentary based on what you've introduced. So thank you. I just wanted to just elaborate just a moment more. I am the director of What Matters, as Senator Krueger said, and we're a program of the Jewish community of New York City. We address all religious affiliations. We are really set up to encourage everyone to engage in advanced care planning, to make your healthcare wishes decided and known. And we're going to be talking more about what exactly advanced care planning is and what it is not. I wanted to just say that 90% of the people in this country believe that advanced care planning is important, and less than a third of them have actually engaged in this work. So our mission is to close that gap, and hopefully you will help us do that today. We have trained facilitators at What Matters who will walk you through this process. So keep that in mind as you hear about the different steps involved. We're here to help you afterwards, and we'll tell you how you can access this help. And with that, I turn it over to my colleague, Tina.
So thank you, Sally. So I'm with New York Legal Assistance Group, and New York Legal Assistance Group has been in existence since 1990. And we serve low income, low asset New Yorkers who cannot afford the services of a private attorney. And we have different divisions, whether it be for housing concerns. We have a medical legal partnership, which is legal health that exists in various hospitals. We have consumer protection division. So we really have a lot of different help available. We do not do criminal law, and we do not do torts, which are slip and falls. But you can definitely get more information about New York Legal Assistance Group by looking at nylag.org, and everything about us is online. So maybe we can move now to the first slide. So today we will be discussing healthcare decision making, and we will be explaining a little bit more how that is limited in scope to what we were going to be discussing. Could I please see slide 2? Thank you. So please do not record or share images. I think that one of my main concerns is that certain information might be taken out of context. So it is best if somebody views this, and as Senator Krueger mentioned, this will be available to you afterwards to listen to the recording again. But I think it's very important that this not be shared kind of in a vacuum, just certain slides or certain comments. Also, what I wanted to state is that the information that we are providing is state specific. We are in New York. I'm an attorney admitted in New York and only in New York. So I'm knowledgeable about what happens in New York and not in other states. Also, we are providing information. We are not providing specific information. We're not providing specific advice, and there is no attorney-client relationship that is going to be an outcome of this presentation. So could I please get the next slide, please? Thank you.
So I'll take the next slide. We wanted to just give you an overview of what this session is going to include. And please know that there is so much that we have to cover. We usually do it in twice as much time. So understand that we're necessarily having to move more quickly than we would otherwise do, but we will touch on all of the important topics. And as Senator Krueger said, there will be a question and answer period at the end, as well as an opportunity for us to answer some of the questions you submitted in advance. We will offer you an opportunity for follow-up if you need an individualized session to complete some very personal or individualized questions you might have about advanced care planning. And again, you will receive a recording, so you can always go back over some of the information if it feels like overload. So the goals for our session are that by the end of the session, you will understand what advanced care planning is and how important it is. You will want to discuss your wishes with the important people in your life, document your wishes using the New York State Healthcare Proxy form, which is the legal form in New York State, and we'll go over that in detail, and that you will know where to get help with advanced care planning should you want to follow up. And I just want to acknowledge that as we find ourselves in the middle of this pandemic, that we are really in unprecedented times, and many people are feeling isolated, alone, perhaps frightened. And for others, it's a more theoretical conversation that, knowing that anything could happen at any time, and others perhaps are dealing with an illness or a condition, or know someone or you indeed yourself have had COVID or know someone who does. So the fact of COVID has really made this conversation more tangible, more readily on all of our lips to talk about and to think about. And it's difficult, but we really congratulate you on taking this step and welcome you into this conversation, which is important for all adults 18 and over, to prepare for the unexpected.
Next slide, please. So we have also provided some very comprehensive slides, and in light of the time that's allocated, because we want to get to questions and answers, there are certain slides that I most likely will have to be skimming through because I see it's already 10:17 a.m. So advanced care planning allows for you to take control of your future medical and healthcare decisions, if and only if you are unable to speak for yourself. So you do your planning now, just in case in the future you might need it. So advanced care planning there are a certain number of forms that you can do. We will be discussing healthcare proxy forms and living will forms. What we will not be discussing, because advanced care planning, medical planning, does not consist of financial planning. So we will not be discussing powers of attorney, joint bank accounts, joint ownership with right of survivorship, how you own your home, how you own your apartment, what might happen to that. We are not going to be discussing where your property, what would happen to your property, or how you can control how your property will be distributed after your death. We also will not be discussing funeral, burial planning, and the various options that might come with that. And I realize that there might be some questions that come into the chat that we might address later on, but that is not the goal of this presentation. Next slide, please. So an advance directive is a document that allows for you to plan in advance for what you would like or not want in terms of medical treatment, who could make medical decisions for you. The type of medical advance directives that exist in New York State are the healthcare proxy and the living will, which we will be discussing. There are other documents which are medical orders, which means that they get signed by a physician, namely a do not resuscitate order, which comes into play only when a patient is in cardiac or respiratory arrest. So that means that the patient does not have any pulse or is not breathing. So that's what a DNR covers, and that is something, and so it's very narrowly tailored. It has to be signed by a physician, and a physician in New York also needs to renew it every 90 days if it's an out-of-hospital do not resuscitate order. There is another form which is called a MOST. It's a medical order for life-sustaining treatment, and as it says in its title, it's a medical order. So that is also signed by a physician. The MOST form is a hot pink form, which was initially created to follow the patient from bed to bed. So it was really a very striking color so that people would be able to see it. And it's a very comprehensive document because it allows for the doctor to ask a certain number of questions. And because the doctor is aware of what might potentially be ailing you, it allows to ask some questions that are geared to your specific situation. So I think that we can go to the next slide, please. So a healthcare proxy is a document that is a legal document, and we actually provided the law that governs that document, and it's actually quite easy to read. So if you are curious, you can definitely look up the New York Public Health Law, section 2981. And it is a document that allows for a person over the age of 18 to appoint another person or several persons, as long as they are appointed in an order. And we'll discuss that in a little bit, to make medical decisions for them. It only takes effect if and when you are not able to make your own decisions or communicate your wishes for your health care. So what I'd like to focus on, because we do talk about end of life, but a healthcare proxy really, there's a lot of work that goes into being somebody's agent, because you're going to be an agent advocate also. There's a lot of advocacy that needs to be done, because we're not, typically, we're not alive one day and dead the next. There's a process. And during that process, our healthcare agents are able to voice what it is that we would have wanted. So, and I think that that's something that we all need to keep in mind in light of the conversations that we have with our potential agents before we sign any kind of documents. Sally is going to be discussing a little bit what needs to be discussed with a healthcare agent. And I would also recommend, there is an excellent book from Atul Gawande, which is called Being Mortal. And I'll type in the name and the name of the book in the chat. And it's really, it's not at all a depressing read, but it provides a lot of insight, and from a doctor's perspective, about what people go through and what people should be thinking about before they sign a healthcare proxy or a living will. Could we please go to the next slide? So a living will is a document that allows for you to describe what your medical treatment preferences would be, as well as your goals and your values, should you be in a terminal irreversible situation. And the type of medical treatment that you would consider would be, would you want or not want artificial nutrition and hydration? Would you want or not want cardiopulmonary resuscitation? Would you want your doctor to issue a do not resuscitate order? Would you want to be helped with your breathing process? And it allows you to state your goals, values, and preferences. And this is something that Sally will be going over a little bit more. Now, a living will, if you state in your living will, I do not want certain treatments, and you also do a healthcare proxy. So the healthcare proxy is the document that allows you to choose someone to make medical decisions on your behalf. This is your spokesperson. This is the person who's going to be able to advocate on your behalf, to talk to the doctors, to talk to the nurses. So that's the healthcare proxy. The living will is different, because you're not appointing someone. You are stating what your preferences are, what your goals, what your values are, what type of medical treatment you would want or not want. So if you do these two documents together, and they work differently depending on the person, and if you want your healthcare agent's decisions, directive, to supersede what is stated in your living will, you need to indicate that in your documents. And then there's some people who are kind of like, you know, I have my healthcare agent and they're going to be my advocate. But if it comes to end of life matters, I really want my physicians to follow what is documented in my living will. So things work differently for different types of people. If you could please move to the next slide. So if you do not have a healthcare proxy, if you did not designate someone to speak on your behalf, if you're unable to make medical decisions, in New York, we do have a law. It's called the Family Healthcare Decisions Act. And if you are admitted, you need to be admitted in a hospital or in a nursing home. And if you are admitted, then there is an order in which people can make medical decisions for you. So first would be a court-appointed guardian. If there is no court-appointed guardian, it would be your spouse or your domestic partner, and domestic partner is viewed in a very broad fashion. If you do not have a spouse or a domestic partner, it would be your children over the age of 18. If you don't have any children, it goes to your parents, and you can see that it goes all the way to a close friend. So it's wonderful. I mean, we do have the Family Healthcare Decision Act, which is something, I believe it came into effect in 2010. And a lot of us were very relieved, because basically this is what people think would happen if they didn't sign any documents. But the concern with the Family Healthcare Decisions Act is that it does not apply in the community. So you have to be admitted to a hospital and a nursing home. And I cannot tell you how many people in the community, living in the community, need somebody to make medical decisions on their behalf, need to be able to speak to their doctors on their behalf, check on medications on their behalf, advocate on their behalf. So it's very important to do a healthcare proxy, because the healthcare proxy will apply in all situations. The next concern is, do you like this order? Would you want all of your children, for example, if you don't have a spouse or domestic partner, would you want all of your children to be on equal footing to make medical decisions for you? Would you want them to potentially argue, which is the worst thing that a parent would imagine? That's not what any of us would want. So that's something that also needs to be taken into consideration. And also the fact that whoever is going to step up in terms of the Family Healthcare Decisions Act will also have access to your medical records, because without your medical records, they cannot make medical decisions on your behalf. I have a lot more to say, but in light of the time, I'm a little bit concerned. I definitely want to get through the other slides as well. And if you have any other questions about the Family Healthcare Decisions Act, please place it in the chat, and we'll go over that in our questions and answers. Next slide, please.
Okay. I'll take over from here. This slide is really meant to acknowledge what is really in so much of our minds, that advanced care planning really came to the fore. There were articles written, it seems, weekly in the news and in the different articles and TV programs about how important it is to have somebody to speak for you in the time of COVID. COVID, I think, because of how the nature of the disease, how quickly things can develop in the course of the illness, the restrictions that we've all read about in terms of the number and frequency of visitors who are allowed into the hospital should you be taken in, and that doctors who are overstressed and might have limited time to call you, or might need to call you in the case of an emergency, would need to know who they should call, who can speak for you if you are unable to speak for yourself. So it's really sort of telescoped in COVID what is true all of the time, because we never know when an emergency or a serious illness could develop. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that's in all of our minds. Next slide, please. So now when we talk more specifically about preparing your advanced care plan and the healthcare proxy form and the living will that Tina just referred to, the very best thing we can do is prepare our healthcare agent or proxy. The terms are used interchangeably, for them to know what we value in our lives and what makes our lives worth living. The importance for a doctor to know who you are and what you would want based upon decisions you have made and articulated based upon your experiences, goals, and values. Really, what makes you unique? What makes you yourself? That's what we do in our What Matters conversation. That's what we help you think about, what your wishes and choices are. And it's really more important than a specific medical treatment that you might or might not want, because sometimes the more specific we are, the more limited and hands tied a medical professional and your agent would be, because we can't always know the specific circumstances under which you're taken to the hospital or the specific condition that you're in. Saying things like, I would never want, doesn't account for the fact that you might want something under certain circumstances, but rather knowing who you are and what gives your life, what makes your life worth living is really more important information. And I would just also say that the kinds of questions I'm going to read to you now are more important than using vague language that we've all heard or perhaps used ourselves, such as, if I'm ever in that state, just push me over a cliff or shoot me, or I don't want to be a vegetable, or she knows what I want. It's really important to consider these questions and to think about how they might impact healthcare choices. So I'm just going to read these very generally and know that we spend a lot of time typically helping you think them through and listening to what you think is important in helping you communicate those. What are your values, goals, and preferences? What gives your life meaning? What is a good day for you? In other words, what would make you happy, say, on your birthday? What would make you the happiest? What gives you joy and meaning in your life? What type of care would you want if you're unable to communicate or do not know who you are or who you are with and are unlikely to recover? Would you want full measures taken? Would you want limited measures? What conditions would you want put on those decisions? What experiences have you had in your life that influence what you would want or would not want? Often thinking about people in our lives and our families, or perhaps our own illnesses, perhaps people who've been written about in the news, help us gauge where we lie on that continuum about what we would want or not want, and what would be an unacceptable quality of life for you. So again, I can't at this moment go into more detail, but these are all things that we ask you to think about as you prepare your advanced care plan and communicate your wishes. Next slide. Choosing a healthcare agent. So the ultimate word here is someone that you can trust. And I'm going to tell you the 4 qualities that we typically emphasize for you to consider when you choose someone. Is this person willing to assume this responsibility? In other words, they need to know that you're asking them to do it. Sometimes people appoint people and haven't bothered to communicate that with the person they've chosen. They must be willing to discuss your wishes with you, all of the topics that I just read off to you. Willing to implement your wishes, not theirs, meaning sometimes someone who is very close to you and loves you could never make a decision that you would want, and they are therefore not the best person to serve as your spokesperson. And finally, someone who is able to make difficult decisions under stressful conditions. We have included in the materials, and I'll go over those later with you, something called a healthcare information card, which delineates all of these things. You can print it out, and it's sometimes helpful to give to your agent when you're having this conversation with them. Some people are stymied by they just don't know how to choose. They don't want to hurt someone's feelings. You know, they don't know which sibling or child to choose. This should not be a reason not to engage in this process. We can help you think through the alternatives. And it's just as important to let others know who you have chosen. You don't really want a person to pop up as the spokesperson around the bedside and everyone else be caught off guard. So once you've made this choice, it's really important that you communicate it. It does not have to be a family or maybe the obvious person, because sometimes, as I said, it's too difficult for them to meet these requirements. The person that you choose does not have to live in the same geographical area. We've all learned, as in today, that we can do things on Zoom and other telehealth and communication kinds of ways, and doctors can and will reach out to you as long as they have your contact information. And then many people wonder, like, how do I start this conversation? No, my child won't talk to me, or no one will listen to me, or it's just too difficult to bring up. And we also have many ways of bringing it up, one of which is to encourage people to read the Atul Gawande book that Tina referred to, or to use a news article, or to consider that this doesn't have to be one long, heavy conversation, but it can be snippets over time when the time is right. So we're happy to help you think through other strategies for doing that. Next slide, please. Many of you asked this question in your questions that you submitted earlier, and I just want to acknowledge that there are people who are no doubt listening to this who feel that they have no one to appoint as their agent. So who will speak for them? What do they do in this situation? Again, we're happy to help you think through some strategies, but the first and foremost one is to think creatively. Who might do this for you? It does not have to be a relative or a family member. It does not have to be someone who lives close by you, but it can be anyone you trust and who's willing and able to assume this role. It could be a friend, a neighbor, someone in your community of which you are a part, or someone who you think would actually want you to do the same for them. You can both do this for each other. Maybe somebody who sends you a birthday card, someone who you're happy to see and who's happy to see you. Thinking broadly about who might be willing to do this for you is really important. And should there be no one that you come up with, we would strongly encourage you to complete your wishes in writing. And it can be either free form. There are a number of online tools. And if you look up living wills, you'll see some maybe questions that you want to pick or choose from one living will or another. But it's important to write them down and sign whatever you write down and attach it to your healthcare proxy, and to give it to your doctor, and to give it to your lawyer, and to give it to anyone who's important in your life. So we will be more than happy to help you with these strategies. Next slide, please. Please know that advanced care planning is not a one-time event. You can change it as often, as frequently as you want to, as long as you get rid of the other previous documents that you have done. Your wishes certainly changes as your circumstances change. And you can update as often as possible. We call this the 5 Ds. And if you look, there's actually 6 Ds. We've added the 6th one in recent months. If a new decade, death of a loved one, divorce, a new diagnosis, a decline in health, and a disaster such as the COVID pandemic. This is not a static document or a static process. It's always changing. Next slide, please. I turn it over to Tina.
Thank you. So in order to appoint your healthcare proxy, you can choose any competent adult that you trust to make medical decisions on your behalf. But you need to first have a conversation with that person. There are certain restrictions that concern persons who work for hospitals. And if you're a patient, a resident, or applied to be admitted to a hospital, there are certain persons that you cannot appoint unless they're related to you by blood, marriage, or adoption. And if you appoint a physician or a nurse practitioner as your agent, they cannot be both. They cannot be your agent and make medical decisions on your behalf and also treating you. So they need to make a choice between these two roles. If you have special instructions for your healthcare agents, they may be inserted in the number 4, and we'll go over the form of the healthcare proxy. Namely, one of the things that needs to be mentioned in the healthcare proxy is if you want your agent, alternate agent, whichever number of agents you appoint, as long as you place them in a specific order, to make end-of-life decision-making for you, you should insert in this number 4 of the healthcare proxy, I have discussed my wishes concerning artificial nutrition and artificial hydration with my agent or agents, if there's more than one. And you're not stating, I don't want artificial nutrition and artificial hydration, or I do want artificial nutrition, artificial hydration. What you're stating is that you have had that conversation with your agents and that you are allowing them to make end-of-life decision-making for you because they know what your wishes are. And of course, you can't just write that. You actually need to have had that conversation. And when you think about it, it's very, very difficult to make that decision on somebody's behalf. And it is only fair to your agent to let your agent know what your wishes are, because they really need to be completely secure should they tell the doctors to withdraw treatment or to end treatment, which will result in your death. This is something that once it's done, you can't undo it. And it's a huge weight on your agent to have to make that decision. So you want to have a thorough conversation so that they are completely secure in knowing that they are forwarding what your wishes are. So as Sally mentioned, your agent does not have to act. So if you appoint someone, if you designate someone on your form, and that person doesn't want to act or doesn't want to do this, or you've never had a conversation with them, they do not have to be your healthcare agent and step in and make medical decisions on your behalf should you become unable to. They can always decline. And often I have persons who ask me whether they can appoint social workers or their home health attendants. Typically, these persons are not allowed to be their clients' healthcare agents in light of their employment contract. But these are things that you will find out once you have a conversation with them, because if you approach a social worker or a home health attendant or your physician and say, well, would you be willing to be my healthcare agent? They will tell you that whether they can or whether they cannot. And another thing to keep in mind is that under the law, a person cannot be the agent for more than 10 persons unless they are they're related, they're within their family. So so persons cannot just agree to be the healthcare agent for 20 people, 30 people. That's not allowed. So what I also often see in healthcare proxies, and what I'm a little bit concerned about, is that I will see blanket statements. So, for example, some people will indicate, I do not want artificial nutrition, artificial hydration. And when I speak with them, I say, well, even, sometimes we need this just to grow a little bit stronger, so that we can actually exit the hospital. And they will say, no, that's not what I meant. I meant if I am dying, if there's nothing that the doctors can do for me, I don't want artificial nutrition, artificial hydration. But that's not what they indicate on their form. So broad statements can be detrimental and very confusing. So it's very important that you think about what you're indicating. Now, I have had Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, that have their healthcare proxies, and it will state no blood products. And what that means, it's a blanket statement. Regardless of the situation, they do not want blood products. Christian Scientists also have certain indications in their healthcare proxies, because they do not want certain types of treatments, but they will agree to other types of treatments. So if you do have these types of concerns, you should definitely discuss these with clergy members or persons that would be able to guide you. And we will also be providing you with some information as to who would be able to discuss this a little bit more with you. What I also wanted to mention is the living will is not a statutory form in New York. It is recognized by case law, which means, and when Sally was mentioning, you can go online and take a look at the different living wills forms, which means that you have a pretty much open slate to express what it is that you would like to express. But you need to do this in a way that that is understandable, and always keep in mind that you're not going to be there to explain what it is that you've indicated. So you don't want things that might be subject to interpretation. Could I please have the next slide? Thank you. So the healthcare proxy form, and it's going to come on screen, I believe, after this slide. You need to complete your form. You need to sign and date it before 2 witnesses that are over the age of 18. Your healthcare agents may not serve as your witnesses. You can just grab 2 people over the age of 18, whether it be the super in your building and a neighbor, or 2 neighbors. What is important is that they watch you sign, and of course that you're signing of your own free will. So if I could please see the next slide. Thank you. So this is the New York State healthcare proxy form that that was provided to you in an email, and that is also readily available online. So the form in itself is just 2 pages. The form is the easy part. What is more complicated is the work that you have to do beforehand, the conversation that you have to have, this thought process is the most difficult part. The form, what you want to think about is you need, and we all hate to fill out forms, and we all scribble answers in forms, and people have to decipher our handwriting. That is not what we want to do with the healthcare proxy. With the healthcare proxy, you want to be sure that you print legibly your name, the names, addresses, all telephone numbers, and I would also indicate the email addresses, because social workers at hospitals often use email, and that is an easy way to communicate. So I know it's not indicated on the form, but email addresses is always good to indicate. Then you have a space to place an alternate agent. So if your number 1 is not available, then your number 2 would be able to make medical decisions on your behalf. But as soon as your number one becomes available, your number two is ousted. So if your number one cannot be contacted, they're on a plane or they're someplace that doesn't have cell phone reception, then the physicians would contact, the hospital would contact your alternate agent. But then as soon as your number one is able to make medical decisions on your behalf, well, then your alternate agent will need to kindly exit to allow for your first agent to make these decisions. There is a space, as you will see in number 3, that allows you to put an expiration date in your healthcare proxy. I would recommend against that because I had a client, she put down expiration date, and sure enough, one day after the document had expired, she wound up in the hospital and effectively without a healthcare proxy. You can always change your healthcare proxy. You tear up the one that you've made, you ask people to get the copies back or to scan in your new form, but you can always revoke it. This is not something that's set in stone. The number 4 is what we discussed earlier, and this is where you have this option of stating certain preferences and also of stating that your agent is allowed to make medical end-of-life decision-making on your behalf by stating that you have discussed your wishes concerning artificial nutrition, artificial hydration with your agent or agents, and you've actually had that conversation. That's very important. If we could please go to the next slide. Thank you. So when you've completed that, you print your name, you sign, you date in front of your witnesses and indicate your address. You also here have this optional organ and tissue donation that you can sign and date. If you are not comfortable and you do not want to donate your organs, and we're not going to go into the specific conversation about organ and tissue donation, but I would suggest that you just place a line through, cross it out, and you don't sign it and you don't date it. So your healthcare proxy signature is on the number 5. If you don't want to do organ and tissue donation, just cross that out and sign, and your 2 witnesses have these fields to sign and date. Note, if you are signing in front of your witnesses, that means that everybody's putting down the same date because you are all there together at the same time. Your witnesses should also read the statement that they are signing and what the declaration is in terms of, they know you or you've demonstrated who you are, and that nobody's coercing you into signing the document. With the healthcare proxy, there is an option if you are unable to sign to have somebody else sign on your behalf. A signature is your mark. So sometimes persons have more difficulties holding a pen, or the signature might not look like what it looked like 10 years ago, but that's fine. A signature is your mark, and as long as you have signed it and the 2 witnesses say, I've watched this person sign, your document is valid. So what I wanted to mention right now, we do have an executive order that has been, since the beginning of COVID, consistently, I can't find my word, prolonged, which allows for remote witnessing. It also allows for remote notarization, but note, this form does not need to be notarized, and you cannot substitute 2 witnesses for 1 notary. You have to have 2 witnesses. So there is a possibility of remotely witnessing a form. But you need to have audiovisual technology where you can communicate live with the persons who will be witnessing. And you also need to be able to transmit documents, because you as a principal would need to sign it in front of the witnesses virtually on Zoom, for example, and then transmit that document to your witnesses so that they can sign, and then they would transmit the documents back to you. Next slide, please. Sorry, got a little bit. So your copies of your healthcare proxies are valid. And because they're valid, this allows for persons to scan these documents in their files. So your doctors, for example, can scan a copy in your medical files. A hospital, if there's a hospital that you typically go to, go see them and say, you know, I've done my healthcare proxy, please scan this into my file. Note that hospitals do not communicate with one another. So if you typically go to Lenox Hill is not going to communicate with NYU. So you want to be sure that this document is readily available. What you don't want to do is you do not want to put this document in a safe deposit box or in some place that is in your apartment that nobody has access to and nobody knows where the form is. So you want to be able to share it with whomever wants a copy. I would suggest, if you have a smartphone or if your agents have a smartphone, that you snap a picture and that be saved someplace readily available, whether it's in a PDF, in notes, or wherever you might feel comfortable, or your agents might feel comfortable saving that. If you do not have a smartphone, I would recommend, if you have a flip phone, at a minimum, what you would like to do is use a piece of paper and write down ICE. ICE stands for in case of emergency. So ICE and maybe the person's name, or definitely the telephone number. Because in case there's an emergency in the street, what people are going to do is EMS, they're going to look at your phone. You also have certain programs. I know that with my iPhone, I have there's a little emergency field that I can use and that everybody has access to. You don't need my passcode, you don't need my thumbprint. It's an emergency ID. I did not upload any documents. What I did do is I indicated the name of the person who needs to be contacted in case of emergency. So the goal is distribute widely. In your apartment, you want to keep a copy of your medical advance directives either on the outside door of your refrigerator or on the inside of your front door. It's a good idea if you do that on the inside of your front door you can hang a paper bag or hang a bag where you boldly write in case of an emergency, and you can put in there your healthcare proxy, your living will, emergency contact information, the list of your medications. So that would be, if you do decide to go that route, by using a bag, you can actually put more information. Potentially, which hospital would you prefer going to? And if that's a possibility, EMS will take you to your preferred hospital. Next slide, please.
So thank you, Tina. So here we want to talk about if you are sick and must go to the hospital. This also became something that was magnified during the time of COVID, that it's important to bring certain things with you to the hospital, all the more so because you don't know how long you'll be there, and you very well may face the likelihood that no one can go in with you. You're alone from intake on. So it might be handy to keep a list like this close by should you ever need it. I'll just quickly run down what those pieces of information are and items. Identification, preferably a photo ID if you have it. A cell phone and charger. I think the charger is something we would maybe not normally think of, but given again that we may not be able to have the visitors we want when we want them, having a form of communication with you would be really important. Any documentation that you've prepared, particularly the New York State Healthcare Proxy Form, which we've been talking about today, and anything else that you have written that state your medical wishes or the people you would want to make medical decisions for you should you become unable to communicate. Written contact information for the person you would want to make medical decisions for you. So as Tina said, even including the email address and the cell phone number and the address, the medical personnel will be looking at all of those things to get in touch with your agent just as soon as they possibly can. Your insurance information, including Medicare information and cards, would be important. Next slide, it's continued. They will no doubt want to know before you're admitted what your medications are, the dosages and frequency of use, and the condition for which you are taking these medications, your pharmacy information, and then also your primary care physician's name and contact information. And if there is another language that you're more comfortable speaking in, to indicate that as well. And again, this is something you may not have packed in advance, but have a list nearby so it could be packed for you, or you could pack it if you needed to in a rush. Next slide, please. We've covered a lot of information and wanted you to know that if you have particular individual questions, concerns, problems, fears, or just want to make sure that you've covered all your bases, What Matters offers trained facilitators who can help you deal with whatever is on your plate or whatever might be keeping you from completing this process. Many of you are probably familiar with DeRote, which is a wonderful nonprofit social service agency that offers a diverse range of services and programs. And it is, in addition, one of our What Matters program sites. And they have offered to respond to you and to help you address these issues. So please note this email address. Maybe we could also put it in the chat, please. So feel free to email this address and request a conversation with someone, and they will be in touch with you to make an arrangement. And this can be done over the phone. It can be done by FaceTime or Zoom or whatever's most comfortable for you. It can be a small question that you have that you didn't get answered today or that you think about after the fact, or it could be something really significant that you feel needs to be addressed. So we welcome you. Next slide, please. When Senator Krueger's office sent out a confirmation, there were a number of documents that were made available to you, and they will be resent to you after this presentation. Just very quickly, the New York State Healthcare Proxy Form that Tina went over is something that you can download and print out, and it comes with a packet of explanation in the 4 or 5 pages before the actual form. And I suggest that you take a few minutes, which is all it will take, to read those questions because they really address so many of the questions that you might have, and they even go step by step, question by question to help you fill out and make sure you're doing it correctly. We've also included a healthcare proxy wallet card, which we strongly recommend you keep in your wallet because that's a place that the emergency or hospital personnel will look. And it is a replica of the longer form and also requires witnesses to sign it. And it is upheld in a hospital situation. So many people say, but what's the likelihood I'll have that form with me when I need it? If it's in your wallet or on your person somewhere in your personal belongings that you have with you at all time, it's a good idea. The healthcare information card, which I referenced earlier, which is helpful when you are having your conversation with your agent. A special piece document that we put together in What Matters, it's called the Advanced Care Planning Guide, being prepared in the time of COVID. So some of the questions that you might want to consider as you communicate your wishes are on there. The list of things to take to the hospital and a few other important guidelines will be important. You can, again, download that. And an introduction to advanced care planning. It's just some language about what we've been talking about today to remind you about what advanced care planning is and how important it is. So the final slide, the second to final, just wrapping it up, we hope that today has been illuminating for you and that you now have a better understanding of advanced care planning, of the importance of discussing your medical wishes with your healthcare agent and family members, friends, and other important people in your life, the importance of completing a healthcare proxy form, and that you know where you can get additional help with your advanced care plan should you need it. And we'll end on the last slide, which is a cartoon. And I want to acknowledge that this is hard work and it's about the most serious issues that we can think about. But I want to, I guess, emphasize that it has a lighter side too. That first of all, it will remove a burden from you if you go through this and make you feel lighter, make you feel more organized, make you feel a sense of relief that you have done something you know you wanted to do and should do, but have actually done. It may give you a sense of control at a time when you worry about having control in a situation where you can't direct people and tell them what exactly you want. And I have had many people say that these conversations, while maybe a challenge to start and to continue, in the end become among, if not the most meaningful conversations they've ever had. So I hope you will find that too. And with that, I thank you for listening and your involvement and hopefully taking some notes and a to-do list for yourself. And we're happy to take questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both, Sally and Tina, for those wonderful presentation. I know you tried to fit as much in as possible, more, and this could have gone on much longer. We are going to try to get through as many of the questions that have come in through chat and came in advance as possible. But again, folks who don't get questions answered, definitely reach out to Dorot because a lot of this stuff really is going to involve having those kinds of personal conversations. And I'm going to start with I'm going to kind of try to combine questions given the time. We did have a lot of questions about people who don't feel like they have a person who can take this role on. I'm going to sort of combine a couple of questions and then ask both Tina and Sally to address it in different ways. When no family trusted friend is nearby, can one hire a professional to represent you in emergency? Is there such a profession? And sort of a broader question about assuming worst case, you become frail and unable to defend yourself. You've outlived everybody in your life, including your trustee and power of attorney. What can you do in these kinds of situations?
Okay, Sally, do you want to address the no trusted friend, and then I will discuss the Article 81 guardianship.
So again, I mentioned that I would hope that we could help you think outside of the box of someone that you could appoint. And if other people who you've appointed in the past are no longer here, are no longer competent to make those decisions, that you rethink it and try to find somebody who could help you. As I mentioned, friend, neighbor, someone who sends you a birthday card, someone you like to see. And if you belong to a community, I suggest you consider even forming a group of people who could support each other in this, who you could do it for and who could do it for you, who you could get to know and you could have these serious conversations with. And again, a fallback is to write down your wishes and make them known to the people who would know them. So if you actually do not end up having anyone who can speak for you, at least you have spoken for yourself in writing or even by video or recording.
So, and what I would add to that, because I often have people who say, well, you know, the only people that I have are the same age as me or older. And that age is nothing. If you know, you can appoint a 20-year-old and something's going to happen to that 20-year-old when in fact your brother or sister or friend who's older than you is still going to be around and would be able to assist you. So age is not something that I would look into in terms of who I would appoint as my healthcare agent, because I don't think that that's a factor at all. Interestingly, often when people say I don't have anybody to appoint as my healthcare agent, and people who want to do a last will and testament, which we're not going to be discussing today, but just for right now to kind of like mention this, when I say to them, well, who do you want to leave your belongings to? And they're kind of like, well, I want my niece and I want da 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 da, and they give me a list of people, and I'm kind of like, well, can't they be your healthcare agent? Because you're thinking about creating a document to leave your belongings to them. What is your relationship with them? And then often I have people say, oh yeah, well, I can ask them and I can have a conversation with them about that. Now, what happens in New York if you're at a point where you are unable to make your own medical decisions? As I mentioned before, it's not a light switch, right? It's not one day we're fine and the next day we're not fine. There is an evolution. What will happen often in New York is rent or maintenance stops getting paid. Neighbors get concerned. The super gets concerned. There are other things that are happening. Maybe you know, your neighbor smelled gas from your stove or something like that. So what happens is members in the community start getting concerned. And if there's nobody that they know they don't know who to contact, they will contact Adult Protective Services, APS. And what will happen is APS will assess the situation. And if there is nobody available to step in to assist you, and that would include making medical decisions, APS will have their Office of Legal Affairs go to court and to get a guardian. It's called an Article 81 guardian in New York, appointed to you, and that guardian will make decisions in light, and it's a tailored decision making. It's the guardianship will be tailored in light of what your needs are. The guardian, just thinking about some of the questions that we saw beforehand, a guardian in New York has an obligation to visit the incapacitated person 4 times a year. There are court reports that need to be made. There are annual accountings that need to be made. So then these things are then done under the watchful eyes of a court. And a court will also make a determination as in terms of what type of medical decisions need to be made. I mean, if it's just general, my understanding is if it's just general kind of run of the mill medical decisions, I mean, a switch in medication or something like that, my understanding is that the guardian would be able to make these without double checking with the court. But once it's something a little bit more invasive, for example, an operation, and of course, making end of life decision making, then there needs to be involvement with the court. When the proceeding is brought, when it is known that there are documents in place, and Sally has been speaking a lot about documenting your wishes in a living will, or whatever type of document you want to call that, that is something that the guardian will be aware of when they find documents. When APS finds documents, they will bring these to the attention of the court, so that these documents or what they state will be kept in consideration in light of your wishes and advancing your wishes in the future when there's a doubt.
Okay, great. I'm going to try to move on to some questions about how to choose your healthcare proxy, combining a couple of these. Can you have two people be your healthcare proxy at the same time? I think that's not ranking them. And then a related question, is it unfair to name one of 3 children to be the healthcare proxy? Will this damage the relationship between them? Is it better to insult them all and designate a third party, leaving them with no control if they are not good persuaders? I think Sally was the one who thought she might be able to handle this one.
So according to New York state law, you can only have one healthcare agent. So in the case of the twins or 2 children, you must choose, and you can only have one agent, alternative agent as well. With regard, you can choose someone who is not one of your 3 children, but if you would prefer to have your children be involved in the decision, my suggestion is that you sit down with them and have a conversation. If you actually don't have a preference of which child it is, have a discussion about it. And if you do have a preference, you might state why so that they can all hear it. And it's not at all because you love one more than the other. It has to do with the fact that one child may not want that responsibility. Another may want something different for you than you want for yourself. So often the conversation itself is illuminating, and a child will actually step back and no longer want to be. And certainly you could make another child the alternate, and do feel free in your added comments in your living will to state that while you have appointed child 1 as your agent, and that one individual legally is the person who has to make the ultimate decisions and relay them to the physicians, that it would be your preference, if time and circumstances allow, for all your children to be involved in the ultimate decision, and to make other people in your family who you might want to be consulted, but just making it clear that only one of them can be the ultimate spokesperson.
Thank you. A couple of go ahead.
Add something, yeah, because I mean, the reason why you can only have one agent at a time, and you can have so an alternate agent, but you can also have an alternate to the alternate, right? So you can have a list as long as it is placed in an order of hierarchy. The reason why you can only have one person at a time to serve is because we don't want arguments, because then they wind up in court. if two people are placed on the same level to make those decisions on your behalf.
Okay.
And obviously, these discussions are better off being had before a crisis hits around the table, around the hospital bed, and to, you know, have made those decisions as difficult as they might be before a crisis hits.
Okay. We had a couple of questions about the status of a living will. You had mentioned something about it not being a legal and not what the specific question is a living will considered a legal document in New York State? And I'm going to combine that with can you clarify your comment about a healthcare proxy can override the living will? Just because I think maybe those two things are related, but you can explain. And maybe Tina, can you start with this one?
So yeah, what I mean is, well, the living will has been recognized by our courts, but there is no statutory form, unlike the healthcare proxy, where there's legislation that specifically indicates what should be in the healthcare proxy form. So in that sense, there is no legal quote unquote document because there's no statute, but living wills have been recognized. And in the past 15 years, there's definitely been an evolution because hospitals are really trying to figure out who this person is. If they have not appointed an agent, how do we make, I mean, it will go to the ethics committee. They will decide what needs to be done. So the living will is a vehicle for somebody to indicate what they would want or not want. And that's why discussing quality of life and explaining who we are in that document is so important. The reason why I mentioned for people, there are certain people who do both, a healthcare proxy and a living will. The documents need to be signed on the same date because we don't want to think, oh, well, one might supersede the other. So they get done in conjunction. Now, what I mentioned earlier is that, let's say I have one child. She's my daughter, she's 25. And I have a conversation with her and I say, you know, this is how I feel. You know, if I'm in a terminally irreversible situation and I'm not communicating and nothing, just please let me go. And my daughter says, I can't do that. It's against my religion, my wishes, I love you too much, or whatever her concerns might be. Well, then in that case, in my healthcare proxy, I would indicate, because definitely my daughter's going to be my advocate, because it's not just about dying, what these documents that we're talking about, right? It's having an advocate, having someone making medical decisions on my behalf. So then I would indicate in my healthcare proxy and in my living will, I have done a living will dated such and such a date, which is the same date as my healthcare proxy. And whatever I indicate in my living will supersede what my agent, right? So that way I have, I've put in writing what it is that my end of life treatment, because I know that my daughter is not going to abide by my wishes. So that's one way of going about it. Most times what happens is I have spouses that want to appoint one another, but they say, what if we're in a common accident? So then they want the living will because they want to be able to leave these directions. Or they say, you know what, because as long as my spouse is able, in this example, as long as my spouse is able to make medical decisions, I don't want my living will really to apply, because my spouse knows me better than any document that I would be able to write. So in that case, they would indicate something like, my agent's directions will supersede what I've put in my living will. So it's really, these are really documents to explain where we are standing and what it is that we would want and not want. And that's how we need to be able to see them. Great,
thank you. We had a lot of questions about wills and funerals and after death, which I'm not going to get into. after seeing these questions, we've definitely been talking about doing an event that will specifically focus on end-of-life financial planning. So stay tuned for information about that, but I want to focus on some of the others. But there is one financial question, which is where can I get either no or low cost attorneys to help with these kinds of issues? And also, how can I get do I need somebody to prepare a living will and healthcare proxy, and are those services, are they available free that we can get access to? And specifically a question about NILOG being available to low-income New Yorkers. Are there similar no or low-cost services for people who might not qualify for NILAG?
Well, Senator Liz Krueger has a great guide, right? That gets published once a year, the Senior Resource Guide, where she does provide information about free legal service providers. The reality is, and we've had this conversation with Senator Krueger's office, the reality is that there's not much free help out there in terms of assisting with these legal documents when we're talking about last wills and testaments or trusts or powers of attorney. For the healthcare proxy and living will, and Sally will speak to this more, these are free documents that are available to you. I actually think that these are the most important documents because it's about your dignity. It's about how you live while you're alive. And you don't need an attorney. You don't need a notary. And Sally, go ahead.
Really, that's the important thing to say, is that you can do this on your own and you don't even have to pay for a notarization and those services. And again, you don't have to pay for the What Matters dialogue that you might sign up for with DeRote. It is also free of charge.
Couple of quick questions, we'll get a couple more in here. Is there a centralized registry for finalized end-of-life documents? And yeah, go ahead. I think there's an answer to that one.
No,
the answer is that there is not.
Okay.
And you know, there is a lot of interest at both the local and the state level to develop such a registry, and some states in fact do. So I'm hopeful that one will come about in the not too distant future, but right now there's not. So the best you can do is make sure it's in your medical record. And some of the hospitals are just beginning to speak to each other. So hopefully once you have that, there's something called an eMOLST, which is an online forum that different hospitals will be beginning to share with each other. But for now, spreading the word is the best you can do.
Since we got a comment about a MOLST, somebody says their MOLST was during facility transfers, a MOLST was misplaced. Can a copy do for a MOLST? Do you need to have that original pink form?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I would assume that since it's a medical order, I would assume that it would also be scanned into the patient's file. So I would think so, but if there's a possibility, so if the form got misplaced, is there still a possibility of doing a new one?
Uh-huh.
And if not, I would speak with the physician, because you know you have the physician because the person signed on the copy that you have, and ask them. I mean, maybe staple the copy to a hot pink form, so that it's visible, and so that a hospital or nursing home or hospice staff are able to see it.
Okay, well, I think with that, I will close. Thank you both again, Sally and Tina. I want to quickly announce some upcoming events. Our next virtual event will take place on Friday, March 5th from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Dr. Sarah Saja, Director of the Center on Aging and Behavioral Research at Weill Cornell, will provide an overview of telehealth at the event plenary session. Afterwards, audience members will move to a Zoom breakout room to learn practical information about getting online for a telehealth session. Then we will have on Thursday, March 11th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Senator Krueger will host a presentation on conspiracy theories with Dr. Richard A. Friedman, New York Times op-ed writer. And we do have our next senior roundtable session on Thursday, March 18th, entitled, well, it's the next of our Being Mortal senior roundtable session, March 18th from 10 to 11:30, and we'll focus on current research and practice regarding the use of psychedelics to ease end of life distress. Obviously, we'll be sending out notices about all these events, so you don't need to remember them all right now, but those are our upcoming events. And we got a sales pitch for our senior resource guide. If you do not have a copy, we actually put it out every 2 years. So we'll have a new one out in October of this year, but we have the 2019-21 available. If you just email us at liz@lizkrueger.com, we can get you a copy. And please remember to stay safe, protect yourself and others. If you have to go out, wear a mask and social distance, and remember to wash your hands. Thank you both again for the presentation.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. Goodbye.